Hello, I'm Gabi. I am going to be talking about multi-criteria decision analysis for port sustainability. So it's a little bit different than talking about ships and ship operation. It's more focused on the port side of things. This is the topic from my master's thesis, which I just recently finished in marine engineering. Professionally, I'm the innovation project manager at a company called the Israeli Coastal and Marine Engineering Research Institute. And we do a lot of physical and numerical modeling for different designs for ports, for breakwaters. And we also collect physical oceanography data. So it could be wave data, wind data, and perform analysis with this data in addition. We also work, my position as the innovation project manager, we work with the Israel Port Company, and I work to find them startups that they can implement into the work that they do. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask, and I will present some research. So, okay. So, I don't think I need to tell anyone here the importance of ports, the importance of shipping. Globally in Israel, or globally, about 80% of trade occurs via waterways, 80% by volume and 70% by value. Israel is an island economy, so 99% of our trade occurs via the waterways, so it comes through our ports. And at the same time, as also mentioned yesterday, about 3% of global carbon dioxide emissions come from the shipping industry. And so when I was looking at these numbers, I was asking myself, how can, like, with shipping being so important in Israel, like it's the way that we live our lives, we wouldn't look the same without the ports. How can we do this in a more sustainable way? And that's kind of what drove me to research this topic. So in Israel, we have 5 different ports. This top picture is Haifa. You can see here, this area is an older port, so it's been used to about 1.5 years ago. The way the ports work in Israel, the Israel Port Company is the landlord for all of the ports. They own all of the land, and then they lease out for 25 years. There's 25-year contracts to different operators. So they're responsible for the development and the maintenance of the ports themselves, and they own the land and the infrastructure, but the operation goes outside companies. Here we have in Ashdod. There are also 2 ports in Ashdod. Both in Haifa and then Ashdod, the ports are in the Mediterranean, the very eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, and the last is in Iraq and that's in the Red Sea, where the conditions are a little bit different than they are in the Mediterranean, because we can different considerations when you talk about the port in Iraq. So, like, my questions were, what exactly is sustainability? What does that mean? And how can ports be more sustainable? So to answer the first question, I looked into it, wanted to define what that meant and how I was using it in my research. So sustainability is the ability to persist over time. It's the ability for us to function and do what we need to do while not compromising the ability of future generations to do what they need to do. And there are 3 elements to sustainability. There's the social element, the environmental element, and the economic element. And making something sustainable is basically finding the balance between all 3 of these elements. So my first thing was, okay, what's already been done? I performed a literature review in 3 different areas: port sustainability, existing regulations and legislation, and multi-criteria decision analysis to kind of understand more about the decision-making process. And so when we look at port sustainability, I found articles talking about how can we improve sustainability at ports, whether most of them address the environmental aspect of sustainability. I found a lot of articles that talked about how do you determine evaluation criteria, how can you evaluate how sustainable or how green or how environmental a port is. And then a lot of articles also comparing between ports, whether that be comparing to a port that's known for being environmental, either like the Port of Rotterdam, the Port of Long Beach, or comparing between ports in specific areas. Like I found an article that was comparing between different ports in the UK, and which one is the most sustainable. I also found a literature review many different articles. And one thing that really stood out to me was that no articles addressed all three elements of sustainability. So even when they talked about the environmental aspect or the social aspect and combine that with the economic, there were no studies that were done looking at all three. So I decided that was something that was important to me to incorporate into my research. So the next thing I looked at was regulations, legislation. I don't think I really need to go into all of this with you guys. You know most of this stuff. The one thing I will point out is EcoPort. This is the only certification that's port specific for environmental standards. It's a European certification that you can get. The ISO 14001 is just a general certification that any company can get, and EcoPort is specifically for ports. In Israel, we have the Administration of Shipping and Ports. There's a port authority under the Ministry of Transportation. In 2019, there was a study done of emissions at the ports. They found high levels of SOx and NOx, which is not surprising. And as of February of 2023, they implemented fuel quality regulations for ships that are in the port and moored outside. Israel is also Israel and Lebanon are the first two adjacent countries to come to an agreement about their EEZ, about that exclusive economic zone. And Israel also has an agreement with Cyprus, because the area is kind of really dense. The EEZs overlap with each other, so Israel has separate agreements with the surrounding countries. And again, Israel and Lebanon are the first two adjacent countries in that region to have an agreement. So the next thing I looked at was multi-criteria decision analysis. What does this mean? What is included? How is it used? So I found different articles of how it evaluated port performance, whether that be environmentally or just performance in general. And then I also looked at how they use it as a selection. So how do you make a decision? If you want to make a decision between A, B, and C, how do you use this tool to make a decision? Some of the benefits of multi-criteria decision analysis you can see here. And it's really good for when there's not one clear answer. You want to know, okay, like I'm not really sure what is the right choice, and it helps lead you in a direction. You can take in many different types of criteria, whether they be qualitative, quantitative, things that are contradictory of each other. Those are all things you can take into account using multi-criteria decision analysis. And of course, being super complex and having a lot of stakeholders and different things you want to measure different criteria, especially between social, economic, and environmental, where there's all different types of measurements that you can talk about. I really felt like this was a good direction to go into for helping make decisions. So these are my conclusions, things I've kind of mentioned, that there was very little research done looking at all three of the elements. There were no articles on how best to make decisions for port operations. Multi-criteria decision analysis, and specifically the analytical hierarchy process, which I'll go into the methodology in a minute, really fit the needs of my goal. And also that in general, if you want a change to happen, specifically environmentally, there needs to be regulation put into place to kind of drive that change. So my question of how can ports be more sustainable, I decided to use the analytical hierarchy process, create a framework for how decision makers can pick an alternative. So this is the methodology. These are the different steps. And I'll kind of go through what I did for each one. So talking about developing a hierarchical framework, this is the hierarchy I created. At the first level, we have what is your goal? My goal here is port sustainability. In the second level, you can see what the different goals that can put each level together, the different elements. And then the criteria, there's the social criteria, environmental, and economic. And you have your optimization in the last level. The analytical hierarchy process, at the end of the day, we're going to get a ranking for the importance of each of the criteria, for each of the elements, and for each of the alternatives. It's going to be something that's quantitative, so you can really see and understand which is the most sustainable or the most important. So that's the first way to do that. The first step is to create a pairwise comparison matrix. basically comparing between in the same level, each of the criteria or the elements, and then you perform the judgment. In order to do this, I created a survey, and I sent it out to the employees of the Israel Pork Company, and I asked them a question comparing between the levels and cluster demographics. And I'm going to show you an example, and we're kind of going to go through what that looks like. So first, just to hit a little bit on the demographics of the survey participants, I had 22 responses from ICC. The majority were male, have advanced degrees, or between 50 and 60. I don't think this is really surprising information that these were the respondents to my survey. So this was an example question, and this is how I phrased the question for in the survey. If you had $100 to invest in new technologies and development, how would you split that $100 between these three aspects, or four, or however many I was asking about? And so the responses, the respondents had to split up their $100, and I used that to determine their comparisons between each other. I had to figure out in this method to use a 9-point rating scale. And this is the scale that was used, and it was developed on the faculty also developed method. So I decided to take the difference and transfer that to the 9-point scale. So if we're looking at the example that I gave, here's the comparison matrix. They're comparing the environmental appearance, comparing what's here to what the road in the column. So I'm looking between environmental and social. 40 minus 10 is 30. And so you're here, 30 is the same matrix. So whatever experience in the movie, in that other comparison. So that's what this looks like. So that's setting up the matrix in order to do the judgment. And then you have to check for consistency, because it's humans who are doing this judgment. If someone says, especially when you get to more criteria than just 3, if you say A is more important than B and B is more important than C, you have to make sure that A is also more important than C at the end of the day. And then you actually do the synthesis and find the judgment. So again, this is the matrix. I wrote a program using MATLAB to perform the calculations and the judgment. And so this particular responding, this is the weight of the elements that they gave me. And then also using MATLAB, I was able to find the consistency ratio. Because again, just a series of calculations. As long as it's under 0.1, the matrix is considered consistent and is usable. So the next thing is to do this for each of the levels of the framework, and to find the overall priority ranking. So if you look here at the framework, you can see these are locally what the ranking were for the particular level. You can see the environmental was ranked highest based on the result of all of the survey participants, related to local governance, the optimization and profitability. When you look at it globally, overall, just between the 10 different criteria, you can see that profitability has the highest ranking, followed by the air pollution reduction and shifts. So now that I had this framework, my next question was, okay, great, I've completed this, but what can you actually do with it? Now that I understand what the importance is, so I decided to do a case study, and I picked out 3 technologies that are used at ports around the world that I had considered of the things I wanted to use. There are drones that you can use for security purposes, for identifying if there's a large amount of air pollution coming from ships. You can use to identify oil pollution in the port or outside of the port. Electric storage machinery, instead of fuel, machinery is an electric machinery, and then also the creation of a co-working space, utilizing areas within the port that are not currently being utilized and giving them another function. So you can see now I filled in the alternatives, and everything that we've just done for the rest of the framework gets applied to the alternatives, comparing them based on each of the criteria. So for example, I looked at the air pollution reduction shift and said I need to compare 3 different Looking at drones from their common computers, drones have the ability to identify large amounts of air pollution coming from ships, but maybe it shows that there's a problem. Or the electric machinery, although it reduces air pollution, it's not air pollution from ships. And so I rank the drones at a 5 and the machinery at a 1, so on and so forth, doing the comparisons for each of the criteria, putting them into the matrices, and so on and so forth. And at the end, I see the weighting for each of the alternatives. Drones in this case were the most sustainable when taking all three into account. Something that's nice about this method is that not only can you get a total ranking, you can also divide it up by inclusive elements and find which one is the best for each element. So based on the population for the environment, drones are the best for economically, realistic machinery, and socially good public things. So the conclusions from my research were that, of course, I really learned about the importance of sports. I kind of went into this not realizing and not knowing a lot, and really came out with the knowledge that they're essential to not only Israel as a country and the way that we run and the way that we function, but the entire world. And how complex and how many stakeholders there are in sports. And based on this information, like based on how important they are, and the fact that we want shipping and ports, they're around to stay. So how can we do them sustainably? And I think that this is a way to really kind of be used as a tool in that decision-making process. It shouldn't be the only tool used to make a decision, but it's definitely something that can give you a good direction. And the differences in ports all around the world, ports have their own needs, their own conditions. And using this tool, you can easily switch out what the different criteria are. You can ask more locally, you don't have to use the same rankings. And it's a fairly easy tool to use and to adapt to your own needs. Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
So when we're looking at air food,
Yeah.
do you also consider that from the social perspective of local community?
Yes, so I think in this case, like I think they're definitely related. It's kind of hard, like I didn't want to make it overly complex, so I limited myself to 4 criteria for each of the elements. And I picked out things that stood out to me in other research that I had read, but in the research where they're picking out criteria and stuff. I didn't address that in this here, but it's definitely something that should be considered.
Yeah, but go back a couple slides. At a certain stage, you showed a drone and the moment.
Yeah.
Those are the example solutions, but it wasn't really have you progressed. There were solutions and
no, so I picked I developed the framework and wanted to apply it. So I based on my professional work and things that I've seen, I picked out different solutions that I've seen and decided to compare between them. So it's not anything that the Israel Port Company has decided to right? Like it's just something that I picked out based on what, and I a little bit minicky, right? Like picked out, okay, like a co-working space is something that will clearly win on the social side, and kind of wanted to show how you can compare those differently.
Right, because it was that big cold iron and show up with that.
Yeah, well, they already use cold ironing, like the Newport and Tyson has cold ironing, so I decided not to include it because it's something that already exists. Yeah, you could, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool, thank you.